The town of Brooksville wasn't marked on most maps. It wasn't the kind of place that people traveled to for excitement or grand opportunities. Instead, it was a town where the rhythm of life followed, the slow toll of the church bell on Sundays, and the rustle of leaves that lined the sidewalks in autumn. Families had lived there for generations, each adding their own threads to the fabric of community life. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, at least by name or by face. Children rode their bicycles down the narrow streets. Neighbors waved to one another across fences, and on summer evenings, the glow of porch lights spread a feeling of safety and warmth. Yet beneath the surface of calmness, Brooksville wasn't untouched by the world's harsher realities. The police department, though small, played an important role in keeping the peace. Unlike big cities plagued by constant crime, Brooksville faced occasional disturbances. An argument that grew too loud at the bar, a burglary at a store, or a reckless driver tearing down Main Street. But every officer knew that danger could arrive at any moment, and for that reason, they relied heavily on a member of their team who wasn't human Rex, the German Shepherd. Rex wasn't just any dog. He was a symbol of discipline, loyalty, and protection. Standing tall with his sleek black and tan coat, he had eyes sharp enough to freeze a person in their tracks. Trained from a young age, Rex had learned to sniff out drugs, track missing persons, and respond instantly to commands. His handler, Officer James Daniels, trusted him more than anyone else on the force. Together, they had formed a partnership that went beyond words, a silent bond where each could anticipate the other's next move. To the department, Rex wasn't just a working dog. He was an officer in his own right. The townspeople admired Rex, but they also feared him. They saw the way he sat, rigid and alert, beside Daniels during community parades. They watched how his ears twitched at every sound, how his gaze never wavered, as if constantly assessing threats. Parents would pull their children closer whenever the K-9 unit passed. "Don't get too close," they would whisper. "That's not a pet. That's a police dog." And most children obeyed. They admired him from afar, eyes wide with a mix of awe and nervousness, never daring to step too close. But Emily was different. At 3 years old, she had none of the fear that adults carried. Emily was a curious, bright-eyed child who had just begun piecing together the world in her own way. With golden curls bouncing around her face and a tiny giggle that carried like music, she approached everything with wonder. While other children squealed at the sound of Rex's commanding bark, Emily only laughed. While parents warned their little ones to stay back, Emily leaned forward with eager eyes. To her, Rex wasn't frightening. He was fascinating. Her parents, Sarah and Michael, noticed it early. Whenever the police car drove past their street, Emily would rush to the window, pressing her small palms against the glass. "Doggy!" she'd exclaim, pointing excitedly as Rex's head appeared in the back seat, ears perked, mouth slightly open in his usual stoic pant. She would wave frantically, believing that Rex could see her. Sometimes Daniels noticed the little girl through the glass and gave her a polite nod, though Rex never turned his head. On weekends, when the department held community events in the park, Emily would tug on her mother's hand, dragging her toward the area where Rex stood tall beside Daniels. Children circled from a distance, whispering to each other, but Emily stood right at the edge of the rope barrier, staring at the dog with wide eyes. "I want to pet him," she often said. Her mother would smile nervously, shaking her head. "Not this one, sweetheart. That dog has important work to do." Emily would pout but never cry. Somehow, she understood that Rex wasn't just any dog. But she also believed, in her innocent way, that one day he would understand her too. Officer Daniels had noticed her by then. At first, he thought nothing of it. Children were curious about Rex all the time. But Emily was different. While most children giggled nervously or screamed when Rex barked, She simply stared, quiet and steady. Daniels would often glance down at Rex, half expecting him to growl or stiffen at her stare, but strangely, Rex never reacted. He would sit in his rigid stance, but his gaze would sometimes linger on Emily for a moment longer than with others. Daniels chalked it up to coincidence, never realizing how deeply this connection would matter. Rex himself carried a weight unseen by others. Though he looked fierce, the dog's life wasn't one of ease. Each mission demanded focus, courage, and sometimes danger. He had been sent into dark houses, forced to chase suspects, and commanded to search for people who didn't want to be found. His training was strict, and his handler's commands allowed no room for mistakes. Discipline was everything. But discipline also left little space for softness. While Daniels cared deeply for his partner, he treated Rex with the professionalism of a fellow officer, not as a pet to cuddle or spoil. That was the paradox of Rex. He was loved and respected, yet always distant. To the community, he was untouchable, a silent guardian who demanded space. To Daniels, he was a soldier, reliable and brave, but always working. Rarely did anyone see the dog simply be. And that is where Emily stood apart. For reasons no one could explain, she never saw Rex as a soldier. She didn't understand the badges, the uniforms, or the layers of training. She only saw a dog, a creature with eyes that to her weren't cold but kind. Her innocence stripped away the barriers adults had built. And in her laughter, Rex was not a machine of law enforcement, but something softer waiting to be unlocked. In those early moments, her waving from the window, her tugging on her mother's hand, her unwavering stare across the rope at community events, a seed was planted. No one noticed it then, but it was there. A silent promise that someday, the little girl and the police dog would meet without barriers. And when they did, the world around them would hold its breath. Brooksville had always been a town of simple stories, family picnics, Friday night football games, parades that circled Main Street. But soon, it would carry a story unlike any other. One that began with a 3-year-old girl, a police dog, and the quiet belief that sometimes the purest hearts see what others cannot. Children often found their heroes in fairy tales or animated characters, but Emily's hero walked on 4 legs, wore a badge, and carried an air of mystery. Her fascination with Rex wasn't a passing interest like her fleeting love for dolls or picture books. It was steady, unwavering, and deeply rooted in her heart. At 3 years old, Emily was still learning words, still figuring out the vastness of the world. But somehow, the large police dog had claimed a permanent space in her imagination. While her parents thought her interest was cute, they didn't realize how much Rex lingered in her thoughts. Every time she spotted Rex from afar, Emily's entire face lit up. Her eyes sparkled as if she had discovered magic, and her small hands clapped together in excitement. "Doggy," she would say with the clarity of someone announcing something extraordinary. To her, Rex wasn't just a dog. He was something larger, something powerful, yet strangely comforting. Her mother, Sarah, would often laugh softly at her daughter's excitement. "Emily, sweetheart, he's not just any dog," she would explain, crouching down to meet her daughter's curious eyes. "That's a police dog. He has a very important job. He's not for playing with." But Emily, with her stubborn innocence, would shake her little head. "Doggy good," she would reply with the kind of certainty that no one could challenge. Her father, Michael, would smile knowingly, ruffling her curls. "She's not going to let this go, you know," he would tease Sarah. Despite their gentle warnings, Emily's fascination only grew. She had plush toy dogs at home, but none of them seemed right. She would line them up and point to one, whispering, "Rex," as if naming it made the toy more real. Sometimes she would even pretend to command them the way she had seen Officer Daniels do during demonstrations. Her voice was high-pitched and sweet, but she tried to mimic the seriousness of the officer's tone. "Sit," she would say, and then clap when her stuffed dog toppled over. Sarah and Michael didn't mind. They thought it was an innocent phase, like when she had once insisted that her pink teddy bear could talk. But what they didn't know was that Emily felt something deeper. She didn't understand police training, discipline, or danger, but she understood eyes. And when she looked into Rex's eyes, even from a distance, she felt a strange warmth. One afternoon, Sarah took Emily for a walk downtown. The sun was bright, bouncing off shop windows, and people moved lazily through the streets. At the far end of Main Street, Emily spotted the police car. Her heart thumped in excitement. Tugging her mother's hand, she pointed wildly. "Doggy, doggy." Sure enough, sitting tall in the back seat, Rex stared out the window. His gaze swept over the street with calm vigilance, scanning every detail. Most passers-by kept their heads down, intimidated by his sharp presence. But Emily, pressed against the stroller's edge, waved with all the energy in her tiny body. "Hi, doggy," she called out, her voice carrying over the hum of traffic. For a moment, Sarah thought it was pointless. Rex was too focused, too disciplined to notice. But then, to her surprise, his head tilted slightly, his ears twitching. He didn't wag his tail, he didn't bark, but his eyes lingered on Emily longer than usual. Sarah blinked. "Well, I'll be," she whispered under her breath. That night, Emily couldn't stop talking about it. In her toddler vocabulary, she tried to explain to her father what had happened. "Doggy see me? Doggy look." She repeated it over and over, as if it were the most important event of her life. Michael chuckled, kissing her forehead. "Maybe he did, princess. Maybe he did." As weeks passed, Emily's quiet fascination deepened into something almost like devotion. Whenever Rex appeared at community events, she would always find her way to the front of the crowd. She didn't run, scream, or try to climb under the ropes like other children. She simply stood there, steady, staring up at him with her wide eyes. Officer Daniels noticed her by now. "That little girl again?" he murmured once to a fellow officer. He had grown used to seeing children admire Rex, but they usually lost interest after one or two sightings. This girl was different. She was consistent, and she wasn't afraid. Daniels glanced down at Rex, who sat in his rigid stance beside him. "Strange," he muttered. "You don't growl at her." Rex remained silent, his gaze locked forward, but Daniels knew his partner well. The dog was aware of the child. He could sense it. Daniels didn't think much of it, though. To him, Rex was simply tolerating her presence. But for Emily, each encounter was like adding another piece to a puzzle she didn't know she was building. She would go home and draw pictures with crayons, stick figures of herself, her parents, and always the large dog with pointy ears standing beside her. She couldn't spell Rex, but she would scribble little letters near the dog, insisting it was his name. Her parents began to realize this wasn't just an ordinary phase. "She's really attached," Sarah admitted one evening as she watched Emily coloring on the living room rug. "It's like she thinks he's hers somehow." Michael shrugged thoughtfully. "Maybe it's good. Kids usually fear big dogs. She's different. Maybe she sees something we don't." Sarah frowned softly. "I just worry. He's not a pet. He's a working dog. What if she tries to get too close one day?" Michael glanced at Emily, who was humming to herself while carefully coloring Rex's fur brown instead of black. "She's careful," he reassured. "She knows there's something special about him. She's not reckless, just connected." Still, Sarah couldn't shake her unease. She knew her daughter's fascination wasn't going away anytime soon. And deep inside, she wondered if fate was quietly weaving something bigger than they realized. Children are often drawn to things adults can't explain. Sometimes it's a song, sometimes a toy, and sometimes it's a bond no one can put into words. For Emily, Rex wasn't just a dog in uniform. He was a mystery waiting to be unraveled. A silent friend who seemed to carry the weight of the world, yet sparked a warmth she couldn't resist. And though neither the little girl nor the hardened police dog could possibly know it yet, their story was only just beginning. The first Saturday of October arrived with the crispness of autumn in the air. Brooksville's town square came alive with the bustle of families, laughter, and music drifting from loudspeakers strung across lampposts. Every year, the local police department hosted a community safety fair, an event designed to remind residents of their protectors while giving children a chance to explore police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances. It wasn't just about safety. It was about strengthening the bond between the officers and the people they served. Booths lined the sidewalks, decorated with banners and balloons. Officers handed out stickers shaped like badges. Firefighters let children sit inside engines, and volunteers served hot dogs and lemonade. The smell of roasted peanuts and funnel cakes floated in the air, mingling with the crisp scent of leaves that had begun to fall. But the most anticipated attraction was always the K-9 demonstration. Families gathered near the roped-off area in the center of the square, whispering excitedly about Rex, the town's legendary police dog. "He's so smart," one mother told her son. "He can sniff out anything." Another child bounced eagerly, saying, "I saw him on the news once. He caught a robber." For Emily, though, there was no sense of awe mixed with fear-only determination. From the moment her parents had told her that Rex would be at the event, she hadn't stopped talking about it. "See Doggy," she had said repeatedly that morning, her curls bouncing as she pulled at her shoes impatiently. Now, standing at the edge of the crowd, Emily's small hand clutched her mother's. Her wide eyes scanned the area until she spotted him. There, at the far end of the rope, stood Rex beside Officer Daniels. He looked even larger than she remembered. His thick fur gleamed under the sunlight, and his sharp ears twitched at the surrounding noise. His amber eyes moved steadily, scanning the crowd as if measuring each person's intentions. Daniels stood tall beside him, one hand resting lightly on the leash, his posture calm yet ready. "Stay back, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, gently pulling Emily closer to her side. But Emily hardly heard her. Her gaze was locked on Rex, her heart pounding with excitement. Daniels raised his voice to address the crowd. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this year's Safety Fair. Today, we'd like to give you a demonstration of what our K-9 officers do to help keep this community safe." Polite applause spread through the crowd. Children craned their necks, parents lifted toddlers onto their shoulders, and phones rose into the air, ready to record. Rex stood perfectly still, every muscle taut with discipline. Daniels gave a sharp command, and in an instant, Rex leaped into action, racing toward a mock suspect officer across the field. Gasps erupted as Rex clamped onto the padded arm with astonishing force, dragging the much larger man backward as though he weighed nothing. Daniels gave another command, and Rex released instantly, returning to his handler's side in seconds. The crowd broke into applause and cheers. "He's amazing," someone whispered. Children clapped nervously, their faces caught between excitement and fear. Emily, however, simply watched with steady fascination. To her, Rex wasn't frightening. She didn't see the ferocity in his bite or the danger in his strength. She saw only power wrapped in loyalty, a protector who was misunderstood by those around him. As the demonstration ended, Daniels invited the crowd to ask questions. Parents inquired about training, children asked if Rex liked treats, and Daniels explained with pride how many hours of dedication it took to make a police dog reliable in the field. But while the others listened, Emily slipped from her mother's hand. Sarah didn't notice at first. She was caught in conversation with a neighbor. By the time she looked down, her heart lurched. Emily was no longer at her side. The little girl's tiny shoes tapped against the pavement as she walked closer to the rope, closer to the dog who had captured her imagination for months. Her curls bounced in the sunlight, and her determined little face showed no fear, no hesitation. Gasps rose from the crowd. "Whose child is that?" Someone whispered. Parents instinctively pulled their children back, their eyes widening at the sight. Officer Daniels stiffened instantly. "Hold it right there," he called gently, trying not to alarm the toddler. His grip on Rex's leash tightened. "Ma'am, your daughter?" he asked, looking toward Sarah, who had rushed forward, her face pale. "Emily, sweetheart, come back," Sarah cried, her voice trembling. But Emily didn't turn. Her eyes were locked on Rex, who now stood alert, ears erect, tail rigid behind him. His training told him to stay calm, to wait for commands, but his instincts buzzed. This was no ordinary approach. It was a child small, innocent, fearless. The square fell silent. Every parent, every child, every officer froze in suspense. It was as though the air itself had thickened, pressing down on the moment. Emily reached the rope barrier. She stopped, her tiny hands gripping the edge, her eyes lifting to meet Rex's. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He knew his partner better than anyone, but he couldn't predict what might happen now. Rex was trained to resist distraction, trained to maintain discipline, but he had never been tested like this. And Emily, sweet, innocent Emily, showed no fear. She stood barely as tall as Rex's shoulder, but her gaze was steady, her little chest rising and falling with excitement. To her, this wasn't a dangerous animal. This was her doggie, the one she had drawn with crayons, the one she had named and whispered about at bedtime. The crowd whispered nervously, unsure of what would happen next. Parents held their children tighter, waiting for an officer to intervene. But in that hushed moment, something hung in the balance, something far greater than a safety fair demonstration. For the first time, it wasn't Rex being introduced to the town. It was Emily, introducing herself to Rex. The square was still, the silence heavy enough to make every heartbeat audible. Children who had been laughing moments before were now clutching their parents' hands, their eyes wide with uncertainty. Adults whispered nervously, unsure if they should step forward or hold back. Officer Daniels stood frozen, his hand firm on Rex's leash, prepared for anything. He trusted his partner, but this situation was unlike any drill, unlike any training exercise. Emily, small and determined, stood at the rope with her wide eyes fixed on Rex. Her curls shimmered in the sunlight as she leaned forward, her tiny fingers gripping the rope as if it were the only thing separating her from destiny. Rex's gaze locked on hers. His body was taut, ears upright, tail still. Every instinct told him to remain disciplined, to wait for his handler's command. And yet there was something unusual in this child's stare. It wasn't the wild, unpredictable gaze of someone reckless, nor the fearful look of someone unsure. It was steady, pure, innocent. "Emily, sweetheart, come back." Sarah's voice broke through the silence, her panic growing with every second. She wanted to rush forward, scoop her daughter into her arms, and drag her away. But something, maybe the sheer stillness of the moment, maybe the way Rex's eyes lingered on her child, kept her rooted to the spot. "Stay calm," Daniel said firmly, both to the crowd and to himself. His hand tightened on Rex's leash. "Easy, boy, easy." But Emily wasn't afraid. She let go of the rope, and in a move that made every parent in the square gasp, ducked under it. A murmur swept through the crowd. Oh no, someone stop her? That dog could, but no one moved. No one dared. It was as if time itself had slowed, holding the town hostage in that fragile instant. Emily's tiny shoes tapped softly on the pavement as she took 3 slow steps forward. She stood before Rex now, barely reaching his chest, her neck craned upward to meet his gaze. The police dog towered above her, a wall of muscle and discipline. His breathing was steady but audible, each exhale puffing through his black muzzle. Daniel's heart pounded. He was ready to give a command, ready to pull Rex back if necessary, but he hesitated. Something about the way Rex's eyes softened ever so slightly kept him from shouting. Something was happening here, something he couldn't quite explain. The crowd leaned forward as one, the square holding its collective breath. And then Emily spoke. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough to carry through the stillness. 2 simple words, spoken with all the sincerity her 3-year-old heart could muster. Good boy. The words were not shouted, not forced. They were whispered with gentleness, as if she were speaking directly to Rex's heart. For a single second, nothing happened. Then everything changed. Rex's body, once rigid with discipline, melted. His ears perked, his sharp eyes widened, and his entire posture shifted. The unyielding police dog, trained to remain focused, trained to resist distraction, let out a low, unmistakable whine. His tail, which had been stiff as a rod, began to wag furiously. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Parents blinked in disbelief. Daniels felt his breath catch. Before anyone could react, Rex moved not with aggression, not with hesitation, but with a sudden rush of affection. He leaned forward, lowering his massive head until it rested against Emily's tiny hands. The little girl giggled, her fingers sinking into his thick fur, her touch unafraid and gentle. The sound that followed stunned the entire square. Rex, the unshakable police dog, let out a soft whimper of contentment and nudged his nose into Emily's paws. The hardened protector had melted into a family pet. The crowd erupted not in screams of fear, but in a wave of awe. Some gasped, some clapped, others simply stood frozen with tears in their eyes. Parents who had once warned their children to stay away now stared in disbelief as their worst fears dissolved into wonder. Officer Daniels could hardly believe what he was seeing. His partner, the dog who had faced down armed suspects, who had never once broken posture in public, was now leaning into the hands of a toddler, like he had been waiting for her touch all his life. Emily giggled again, patting his head with her tiny hands. Good boy, she repeated, her voice filled with delight. And each time she said it, Rex's tail wagged harder, his eyes softening even more. Sarah covered her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. She had been terrified only moments ago, but now she felt something else, entirely something indescribable. It was as if her daughter had unlocked a door no one else could open. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Did you see that? He's hugging her. I've never seen anything like it. That's the police dog? The same one from the raids? Phones rose higher, capturing the moment, recording the impossible. Already, the story was spreading beyond the square. Daniels crouched slowly, his eyes still locked on Rex, testing the moment. Easy, boy, he said softly, though his voice trembled with awe rather than caution. Good boy. But Rex wasn't listening to Daniels now. His attention belonged entirely to Emily. It was as if the two of them existed in a world of their own, a quiet bubble of innocence and trust, where fear and duty no longer mattered. Daniels shook his head in disbelief. I don't understand, he muttered under his breath. He had worked with Rex for years, seen him in every situation imaginable. He had seen him fierce, disciplined, exhausted, but never this. Never vulnerable. Emily pressed her face lightly into Rex's fur, giggling as he gave the faintest lick of her hand. It wasn't sloppy or overexcited like a pet. It was gentle, restrained, almost reverent. The crowd's awe deepened. A mother whispered to her son, "Do you see that? That's what kindness looks like." A father murmured, "That's not training. That's something else." The square had been expecting a demonstration of discipline. What they received instead was a demonstration of connection, pure, unexplainable, and unforgettable. Sarah finally moved closer, her hands trembling as she approached. She knelt beside her daughter, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Emily, sweetheart, you scared me." Emily looked up at her mother with a radiant smile, still cradling Rex's head. "Doggy good," she said simply, repeating her 2 words. Sarah's heart cracked open at the sight. Her daughter wasn't just fascinated anymore. She had reached the soul of a creature no one else had been able to touch. Officer Daniels rose slowly, his mind racing. He knew what this moment meant. He knew this wasn't just about a child and a dog. This was about something deeper, something that couldn't be explained by commands or training manuals. It was about innocence breaking through walls built by discipline and duty. The crowd's applause began softly and grew louder, until the entire square was cheering, not for the police department, not for the safety fair, but for a 3-year-old girl and a dog who had just reminded everyone of the power of 2 simple words. And as the noise swelled, Daniels whispered something only Rex could hear. "You needed that, didn't you, buddy?" Rex wagged his tail harder, his head still buried in Emily's small hands. The square had never been so loud. Applause thundered across the open space, echoing off the old brick buildings that framed the heart of town. What had begun as a stiff, almost clinical police demonstration had transformed into something unforgettable. And every single person knew they had just witnessed history. But amidst the cheering, Officer Daniels stood in quiet disbelief. His hands still held Rex's leash, but the leather strap now felt more like a formality than a necessity. Rex wasn't pulling, wasn't on edge. Instead, he was pressed close to the little girl, leaning into her like she was the only safe place in the world. Emily giggled again, her cheeks flushed pink with delight as she continued to pat Rex's head. Her tiny voice cut through the crowd's cheers with another gentle, "Good boy." Each time she repeated it, Rex's tail wagged like clockwork, a silent vow of trust between them. Sarah, still crouched beside her daughter, couldn't stop the tears from flowing. She brushed one away quickly, not wanting Emily to see her fear, though now the fear had transformed into something else entirely. "Emily," she whispered, her voice trembling, You made a friend, didn't you?" Emily nodded vigorously, her curls bouncing. "Doggy good," she said again, her voice filled with certainty, as if no one else in the world could possibly disagree. The crowd murmured and whispered, their awe growing deeper by the second. Someone shouted, "Did you record that?" Another voice answered, "I got the whole thing." Phones were held high, screens glowing as dozens of videos captured the moment from every angle. Social media apps were already buzzing in real time, but no one in the square cared about the online world just yet. They were all locked into this singular, magical scene. Daniels finally stepped forward, his boots clicking softly on the pavement. His expression carried a mix of pride, confusion, and something he wasn't used to admitting, humility. He crouched low, reaching a steady hand toward Emily. "You know," he said gently, "not even I've ever seen him like this." Emily looked up at him with wide eyes. "Doggy good," she repeated for the third time, her small hands never leaving Rex's fur. Daniels chuckled in disbelief. "Yes, sweetheart, he's a very good boy." He reached out to scratch behind Rex's ear, familiar gesture, but Rex barely acknowledged him. His focus was still on Emily, as though she had become his anchor. The other officers, standing at the edge of the square, exchanged baffled glances. One leaned toward another. "I've worked with Rex during raids," he whispered. "He doesn't break like this. Ever, The second officer shook his head slowly. That kid. She just flipped a switch in him. Look at him, he's happy. As the murmurs continued, Sarah finally gathered the courage to scoop Emily into her arms. She hesitated at first, unsure how Rex would react if she pulled his new friend away. But Rex didn't resist. Instead, he simply sat back on his haunches, wagging his tail, his amber eyes following Emily, as if to make sure she was safe in her mother's embrace. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, pressing her face into Emily's curls. Don't you ever scare me like that again, she whispered fiercely, though her words were softened by the tears still streaming down her cheeks. Emily leaned back just far enough to grin and say, Doggy, love me. The crowd's collective gasp turned into another round of applause. Someone shouted, She's right. He does, another added. That little girl tamed a police dog. Daniels rose to his feet, still shaking his head. Unbelievable, he muttered. For years, he had been Rex's closest companion, the one who fed him, trained him, guided him through dangerous situations. And yet, in a single moment, this child had unlocked something even he couldn't touch. The mayor, a stout man with a booming voice, stepped forward and called for quiet. The crowd hushed slowly, though their excitement still simmered in the air. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying with authority, what we just witnessed is nothing short of extraordinary. He gestured toward Emily, who was now perched on Sarah's hip, still waving happily at Rex. This brave little girl reminded us all today that kindness is stronger than fear, and innocence can reach places we adults sometimes cannot. We came here expecting a demonstration of discipline. What we received instead was a demonstration of love. The crowd roared again, clapping and cheering. Reporters who had been covering the safety fair for the local paper scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Camera crews adjusted their lenses, capturing every detail for the evening news. One journalist whispered to her cameraman, This is going national, maybe international. People need to see this. Daniels, normally stoic, found himself overwhelmed by the attention. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking from Rex to Emily and back again. Guess you've got a new fan club, buddy, he muttered. Rex let out a soft bark, not sharp or commanding, but playful, almost like he was agreeing. The sound drew laughter from the crowd, especially from the children who had been too afraid to approach him earlier. Now, some of them tugged on their parents' hands, begging to pet the good doggy. Daniels glanced at Sarah. If you're comfortable, he said carefully, maybe we could let a few kids say hello, just to show them he's safe. Sarah hesitated, but Emily wriggled in her arms, squealing, Doggy friends. Her excitement was contagious. Sarah finally nodded. One by one, with Daniels guiding them, children stepped forward to stroke Rex's fur. The big dog sat calmly, his tail sweeping the ground with steady wags. Every time a little hand reached out, Rex leaned in not aggressively, not impatiently, but with surprising gentleness. The parents, who minutes ago had been terrified of the interaction, now stood in awe, snapping pictures and shaking their heads in disbelief. I never thought I'd see this, one father whispered to his wife. Neither did I, she replied. Through it all, Emily stayed close, watching proudly as if she had given the town a gift. Every time Rex wagged his tail or licked a small hand, she clapped her own and repeated her two magic words, Good boy. And every time she did, it seemed to remind Rex why he was there, why he trusted her. By the time the crowd began to disperse, no one was talking about fire safety drills or traffic rules anymore. All conversations revolved around the little girl and the police dog. Parents called relatives. Teenagers uploaded clips online. Reporters rushed to get their stories filed before deadlines. The moment was no longer confined to the square. It was spreading, rippling outward like a stone tossed into still water. Sarah carried Emily home later that afternoon, her heart still pounding. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. Something had changed in her daughter, and maybe in the whole town. And as for Daniels, he walked Rex back to the patrol car, still shaking his head, still muttering in disbelief. "Good boy," he said softly, testing the words Emily had repeated. To his surprise, Rex's ears perked, his tail wagging. Daniels laughed under his breath. "She really did teach you something, didn't she?" But deep down, he knew it wasn't just Rex who had learned something. Everyone had. By the next morning, the small town felt different. The air buzzed with a kind of energy that Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on. When she walked into the kitchen, still half asleep and clutching her mug of coffee, she found Emily sitting at the table, humming softly to herself while drawing with crayons. Sarah leaned down and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Good morning, sweetheart. What are you drawing?" Emily held up the paper proudly. It was a child's sketch, messy and colorful, but the shapes were unmistakable. A big dog with floppy ears standing next to a tiny girl with curly hair. Above them, in bright red crayon, Emily had scrawled the words she knew best. "Good boy." Sarah smiled softly, her heart swelling. She hadn't stopped replaying the events of yesterday in her mind. It was burned into her memory, the way Rex had. Melted at Emily's words, the way the crowd had erupted, the way strangers had gasped and cried as if they too had felt the magic. But what Sarah didn't realize, at least not yet, was that the moment had been captured in dozens of videos, and those videos were already spreading like wildfire. Across town, a teenager named Mark sat in his bedroom, refreshing his phone with wide eyes. His shaky, unfiltered clip of Emily stepping under the rope and saying, "Good boy," had already hit 10,000 views overnight. By breakfast, it doubled. By lunch, it was over 100,000. On another side of the country, a college student scrolled through her feed during a break between classes. She stumbled across the video, paused mid-bite, and replayed it twice. The comments below were exploding. "This melted my heart. Proof that children see the world differently. I'm crying at my desk right now. Dogs know. Kids know. We should all listen." By the end of the day, the story wasn't just local news, it was national. Major networks clipped together footage from different angles, showing the moment from multiple perspectives. Headlines began appearing. 3-year-old tames police dog with 2 words. Small town demonstration turns into viral symbol of innocence and trust. The girl who called him good boy. Sarah didn't notice at first. She was too busy folding laundry and preparing lunch to check her phone. But when her neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, knocked on the door, grinning ear to ear, Sarah knew something was happening. "Sarah, you won't believe this," Mrs. Callahan said, breathless. "Emily's on the news." Sarah blinked. "What do you mean, on the news?" Mrs. Callahan thrust her phone forward, showing a video clip. And there it was, Emily's tiny figure, Rex towering over her, and that unforgettable moment where she whispered, "Good boy." The clip cut to a news anchor saying, "This heartwarming story out of a small town is capturing the hearts of millions across the country." Sarah covered her mouth. "Oh my God." Emily, oblivious, continued coloring at the table. "Doggy good," she hummed, as if reliving the moment in her own way. By that evening, Sarah's phone buzzed nonstop. Relatives called, friends texted, and numbers she didn't recognize left voicemails asking for interviews. She tried to keep it quiet, but there was no stopping it now. The story had taken on a life of its own. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was dealing with a very different kind of chaos. At the police station, phones rang endlessly. Reporters showed up at the front desk asking to see Rex. The department's Facebook page was flooded with messages from around the world. Some praised Rex's discipline and gentle nature. Others praised Emily's bravery. But nearly all of them said the same thing. This story gave me hope. Daniel scratched Rex's ears, sighing heavily. You've gone and done it, buddy. You're famous. Rex wagged his tail, unfazed by the commotion, as if to say fame meant nothing compared to the memory of that little girl's voice. Within days, the story reached beyond the United States. A British morning show aired the clip with hosts dabbing at their eyes. A Spanish newspaper called it El Milagro del Buen Chico, the miracle of the good boy. A Japanese broadcaster labeled Emily the dog whisperer child. The world had taken notice. But while the internet spun with joy, some voices raised cautious questions. Commentators debated on radio shows. Was it safe for a child to approach a police dog? Was the department irresponsible for letting her so close? Could this moment set a dangerous precedent? Daniels faced these questions head-on in interviews. Rex is a trained working dog, he explained calmly. But what happened wasn't about training. It was about connection. Emily's innocence reached him in a way none of us could. It was extraordinary, and it was real. Still, he couldn't help but wonder. Why Emily? Why her words? Why that moment? He replayed it in his mind late at night, just as Sarah did at home. Neither of them had answers, but both knew it was bigger than them. Emily, meanwhile, lived her life blissfully unchanged. She still played with her dolls, still left toys scattered across the living room, still asked for bedtime stories. To her, Rex wasn't a symbol or a viral headline. He was simply doggy good, her furry friend who wagged his tail when she spoke. But even Emily began to notice the changes. One afternoon, Sarah took her to the park, and strangers approached with wide smiles. Is that her? One whispered. Another knelt down and said, Sweetheart, you're so brave. Can I take a picture with you? Sarah bristled at the sudden attention, but Emily just giggled, waiting shyly. She didn't understand fame. She only knew that people seemed happy when they saw her. By the end of the week, the town square, the same place where it all began, was filled again. This time, it wasn't for a safety fair. It was for Emily and Rex. The mayor invited them back, calling it a celebration of kindness. Hundreds gathered, holding signs that read Good Boy with little paw prints. Children wore t-shirts with cartoon drawings of a girl and a dog. When Sarah walked Emily into the square, the applause was deafening. She tried to shield her daughter from the noise, but Emily's face lit up as soon as she spotted Rex. Doggy, she cried, wriggling out of her mother's arms. Rex bounded forward, tail wagging furiously, and the crowd exploded with cheers. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, but for Emily and Rex, none of that mattered. She crouched down in front of him, smiling as wide as the sun, and whispered the words that had started it all. Good boy. And once again, Rex melted. The crowd erupted, but Sarah hardly heard them. She was watching her daughter and realizing that this wasn't going to fade. The world wasn't going to forget. Her 3-year-old had become a symbol of trust, of innocence, of something pure that adults had long forgotten. That night, when Emily was tucked into bed, Sarah sat at the edge of the mattress and stroked her daughter's hair. You know, sweetheart, you're very special. Emily yawned, eyes half closed. Doggy love me. Sarah's throat tightened. Yes, baby, he does. And so does the world. Outside, the stars glittered in the night sky. The story of Emily and Rex had left the town behind, and there was no telling where it would go next. When Sarah first answered the phone call from a producer in New York, she thought it was a prank. Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitman, the woman's crisp voice said. This is Mary Ann from the morning show. We'd love to fly you, Emily. And Officer Daniels out for a live segment with Rex. America has fallen in love with your daughter's story. Sarah blinked, clutching the phone tighter. The morning show? As in, the national one? Yes, ma'am. We'll arrange everything. Flights, hotels, transportation. We want to share this story with millions. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure how to feel about her 3-year-old being thrust in front of cameras. But before she could object, Emily, sitting cross-legged on the carpet with her crayons, piped up, "Doggy TV?" Sarah exhaled slowly. "I suppose we'll consider it." The following week was a whirlwind. At the airport, strangers recognized Emily instantly. Some leaned down to say hello. Others asked shyly if they could snap photos. Sarah did her best to shield her daughter, but Emily waved at everyone, as if the entire terminal were full of new friends. Daniels traveled with them, Rex at his side, wearing his official service vest. The big dog drew almost as much attention as Emily. Children pointed and whispered, excitedly, "That's the dog from the video." Adults smiled, some wiping away tears as they scrolled through the clip again on their phones. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Daniels murmured as they sat at the gate. Sarah nodded, her arms wrapped protectively around Emily. "Strange doesn't even begin to cover it. She's 3 years old, officer. She doesn't know what fame is." Daniels looked down at Rex, who was dozing peacefully at his feet. "Neither does he. Maybe that's why it works." The morning of the show, the studio buzzed with energy. Producers bustled around, camera operators adjusted angles, makeup artists fluttered about nervously. Sarah held Emily's hand tightly, whispering constant reassurances. "Mommy, bright lights," Emily said in awe, pointing to the stage. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "Just remember, you don't have to do anything you don't want to." Daniel stood nearby with Rex, who remained perfectly calm despite the chaos. One of the hosts, a tall woman with a dazzling smile, approached Emily. "Well, aren't you the bravest little girl in the country?" she said warmly. Emily tilted her head, then pointed at Rex. "Doggy good." The host laughed, charmed. "I think we're all about to find out just how good he is." When the cameras went live, America watched as Emily sat cross-legged on the stage, Rex beside her, tail sweeping across the floor. Daniels explained the dog's background, his training, his discipline, his record of service. Then Sarah was asked about the moment itself. "I thought my daughter was about to scare me half to death," Sarah admitted honestly. But then she spoke, and it was like Rex had been waiting all his life to hear her words. The host smiled, but it was Emily who stole the show. Without prompting, she reached for Rex's head, stroked his fur, and whispered into the microphone, "Good boy." The audience melted. Some clapped, others dabbed at their eyes. Rex wagged furiously, nuzzling her hands in front of millions of viewers. By the time the segment ended, producers were already calling it one of the most heartwarming moments in the show's history. Clips were reposted online before the credits even rolled. From there, the spotlight only grew brighter. Other networks invited them. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about how Emily had a better command over a police dog than most adults. Morning radio shows replayed her voice on loop. Social media accounts created fan art of Emily and Rex cartoon versions, watercolor paintings, even plush toys someone began selling online. Sarah's phone became a battlefield of notifications. Messages poured in from strangers all over the world. "Your daughter reminded me of what innocence looks like. I was having the worst week. Then I saw her video. Thank you. I've never cried over a dog video until now." For Sarah, it was overwhelming. At times, suffocating. She worried about Emily's privacy, about how much attention was too much. But then she would look at her daughter, blissfully unbothered, playing with her dolls or asking when she could see Rex again. And Sarah realized Emily wasn't carrying the weight of the world. To Emily, it was simple. She had a friend, and she liked to tell him he was a good boy. Officer Daniels, meanwhile, found his own life turned upside down. At the station, Rex became a local celebrity. Children visited just to take pictures with him. Officers who had once been skeptical of the media frenzy now proudly called him our town's hero. Daniels received interview requests, speaking invitations, even offers from dog training academies to share Rex's secret. He declined most of them. It wasn't training, he would say firmly. It was her. One night, after a long day of juggling media calls, Daniels sat alone in his small kitchen, staring at Rex. "You know, buddy," he murmured. "We've chased down suspects, done raids, patrolled nights. But this is the thing people will remember us for." Rex tilted his head, then laid it gently on Daniels' knee. Daniels chuckled softly. "And I guess that's not such a bad thing." But fame had its challenges. Paparazzi appeared outside Sarah's house, snapping photos of Emily in her backyard. Strangers sent gifts, stuffed animals, dog treats, letters by the dozen. Some well-meaning, others unsettling. Sarah found herself pulling the curtains more often, shielding her daughter from the constant attention. Still, amidst the chaos, Emily remained untouched by the noise. One evening, as Sarah tucked her into bed, Emily whispered, "Mommy, Doggy, my best friend." Sarah kissed her forehead, tears welling. "I know, sweetheart. And you're his." Weeks later, the family and Daniels were invited to Washington, D.C. They attended a ceremony where Rex received a special commendation for his service, not just for law enforcement, but for what he had come to represent, the bond between innocence and loyalty. As the medal was placed around Rex's collar, Emily clapped with delight, shouting from her seat, "Good boy!" The entire audience, filled with lawmakers, officers, and officials, burst into laughter and applause. In that moment, it became clear. This was no longer just a fleeting viral story. Emily and Rex had become a symbol, a reminder of trust, purity, and connection in a world that often forgot such things existed. Yet Sarah couldn't shake the quiet question lingering at the back of her mind. How long could this last? Emily was only 3. One day, the cameras would move on. The headlines would fade. What would remain then? As she watched her daughter play with Rex after the ceremony, Sarah realized the answer didn't matter. Fame might fade, but what Emily and Rex shared was timeless. For now, the world was watching. For now, they were a beacon. And for now, the little girl's 2 words still echoed in every corner of the country. Good boy. Months passed, but the memory of that day in Brooksville Square remained fresh in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Even as Emily grew, learned new words, and discovered new games, one constant remained: Rex. The police dog who had been trained for law enforcement had transformed into a companion, a confidant, a friend who would always respond to her gentle voice. For Sarah, life had settled into a careful rhythm. The media frenzy had quieted slightly, though messages and photos still arrived in her inbox daily. She had learned to navigate the attention with grace, shielding Emily from the intrusive aspects, while allowing her daughter to enjoy the positive reactions. And the truth was simple. Emily had changed more than Rex or the town. She had reminded Sarah, and countless others, what innocence and kindness could accomplish. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah walked Emily to the police station. The town was quieter now, but the memory of that viral moment still lingered in every corner. Emily skipped ahead, chattering happily, Rex trotting beside her in a calm, dignified manner. Inside, Officer Daniels was waiting, hands on his hips, a proud smile stretching across his face. "Good morning, little lady," he said warmly. Emily giggled. "Doggy!" she exclaimed, running to Rex and hugging him. Daniels shook his head with a laugh. "You two really are something else." Sarah watched them, heart full. She could still see the tiny girl stepping under the rope that day, the tense square holding its breath, and then the miracle of 2 words that had softened the heart of a police dog. It was hard to believe that was only months ago. The station had prepared a small ceremony that morning, one to honor not just Rex, but the bond between Emily and him. A plaque had been commissioned, engraved with a simple phrase, "Good boy," a symbol of trust, innocence, and loyalty. Emily's tiny fingers traced the letters as Daniels read them aloud. "It's beautiful," he said, crouching to her level. "Just like you two." Emily looked up, smiling. "Doggy good," she said again, her voice full of pride. The room was filled with officers and staff, many of whom had been at the square the day Emily first spoke those words. Some wiped tears from their eyes, remembering how an ordinary police dog had become extraordinary through the pure trust of a child. Outside the station, the town had gathered for a small celebration. Children waved banners with paw prints, local reporters took pictures, and families shared stories about how Emily's moment had touched them. Brooksville had become known far beyond its borders, not just for its quaint streets and friendly neighbors, but for a story that reminded the world of simple, transformative kindness. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Rex became something of ambassadors, not for fame, not for recognition, but for the message they had unintentionally delivered. Schools invited Sarah and Daniels to speak to children about safety, empathy, and the power of trust. Libraries hosted story hours where Emily, with Rex at her side, would sit among the children while the story of Good Boy was read aloud. Emily, naturally, didn't understand the magnitude of it all. To her, Rex was simply her friend. She laughed as he nuzzled her hands, played with her dolls, and let her climb onto his back during supervised visits at the local park. But the adults around her understood. They knew that what happened in the town square had been more than a viral moment. It had been a living example of connection, of bridging the gap between humans and animals through patience, innocence, and love. Daniels often found himself watching them in quiet moments, marveling at how a police dog, trained for discipline, had learned something new every day from a 3-year-old girl. "You know," he said to Sarah one afternoon, "I thought Rex trained me. Turns out, he's learning from her." Sarah smiled. "And we all are, aren't we?" At home, Emily's bedroom remained adorned with drawings of her and Rex. Each crayon-streaked image depicted the dog's large, gentle eyes and wagging tail beside her small, smiling figure. Even the walls were decorated with framed photos from various appearances, the safety fair, the television shows, the ceremonies. But the most treasured memory, the one Sarah and Daniels knew would stay with them forever, was the simplicity of those 2 words. Good boy. 2 words that changed a dog, a town, a family, and in some ways, the world. One evening, as the sun set over Brooksville, Sarah watched Emily run across the yard to Rex, who waited patiently by the gate. Emily flung herself onto him, laughing as he gently nudged her back into a standing position. She looked up at her mother, eyes sparkling. "Doggy good," she said once more. Sarah felt her heart swell, knowing that this bond was not fleeting. Rex would always be there for Emily, and the story they had created would remain in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. In the coming years, Brooksville embraced the story fully. Schools added a Good Boy Day to teach children about kindness and responsibility with animals. Local businesses used the phrase in campaigns that promoted empathy. Emily's story became part of the community's identity, a tale of innocence reminding everyone of the extraordinary power in simple gestures. Daniels, watching the town embrace the story he had been part of, understood something he hadn't before. Law enforcement was not only about discipline, rules, and protection. It could also be about connection, trust, and compassion. And sometimes the lessons came from the most unexpected teachers. As for Emily, she remained blissfully herself, curious, playful, and endlessly compassionate. Rex stayed by her side, loyal and steadfast, a gentle giant who had learned what few ever could, that love and trust often speak louder than commands. Years later, when Emily looked back at the photographs, videos, and drawings, she would remember one thing most vividly: the day she spoke 2 words to a police dog, and the entire world seemed to stop and listen. It was a reminder that even the smallest voice could make a difference, that innocence could unlock hearts, and that love, pure, simple, and unassuming, was the most powerful force of all. And in Brooksville, every child who grew up hearing the story of Emily and Rex knew this truth. Sometimes, all it takes is a little courage, a kind word, and a good boy. The town remained forever changed, Emily and Rex's bond eternal, and the world a little gentler for having witnessed it.